He's headed to Alaska.
Would you do the pledge?
Is it how long? I don't know.
Francie okay? Francie okay?
Yeah, he flies free to go to work in Alaska.
Kim's gonna be hanging Francie's excuse. Call this regular city council meeting to order, 1800 hours, July 14th, 2022. Roll call, have Councilman Wolford, Councilman Marsh, myself, Councilman Nielsen and Councilman Kester in chambers. Both Vice Mayor Payne and Councilman Dixon are excused. Next order of business, item 3, Pledge of Allegiance, and the invocation will be offered by Kenneth Clay from the Faith Assembly of God Church. Councilman Wolford.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Let me thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, for allowing the clergy and the community to start your meetings with prayer. We appreciate that. If you'll bow your heads with me. Heavenly Father, let me thank you on behalf of all who are gathered here today. I pray for our mayor, for the various levels of city officials, and in particular for this assembled council. I'm asking that you would graciously grant them wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues of our times. Give them a keen thirst for justice and rightness, confidence in what is good and fitting, and the ability to work together in harmony even when there is honest disagreement. And we pray that you would give them personal peace in their lives and joy in their tasks. And I pray for the agenda that's set before them today. Please give an assurance of what would please you and what would benefit our community of Holbrook. It is in that most blessed name, the name of Jesus, that I pray. Amen. And again, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 4, consent agenda. Chair will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda as presented.
I so move.
I second the motion.
Have a motion and a second. Do we have any comments or questions on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed, motion passes. Moving on to call to the public for non-agenda items. 3-minute time limit per individual. We have 2. Mrs. Connie McPherson.
Good evening, council members and Mayor. Yesterday, I sent my grandkids to the pool, and of course, a couple hours later, the rain started coming down. I called and found out there was no phone at the pool, so I called the city, and the secretary could inform me that there was no phone over there, that they would inform her if they were going to close the pool. I said, all right. So I waited 10 minutes and I could hear the thunder, so I called again. And I asked her, why isn't there a phone at the pool? And she explained to me there hasn't been a phone there since 2 years. I know Mayor Young said it was 10 years since a phone has been there on Facebook, but I do know and I do remember prior to 2 years, I was given a phone number to call to the pool whenever there was a situation. And so I know prior to that there was a phone of some sorts. It was not a landline, it was not a 524 number. So I don't remember if it was a track phone or what, I don't know. But my concern is the lack of the phone. I couldn't really find anything specifically on the website except for a raft that said a phone should be located in the pool area, easily accessible in case of emergency. 911 and local emergencies Numbers should be posted in the pool area. This was on site listed for Arizona. The only other thing that was specific was in the Maricopa, City of Phoenix, section 2420, that basically said the same thing. So I kinda would like to know, what is the policy and procedures on the use of personal cell phones being used at this time at the pool? Because that's what was told to me, that the lifeguards would use their personal phones. So I wanted to know what other areas were doing, such as Joe City, Winslow, Shola. So I called this morning, and each area told me the same thing. They did have a phone available. The primary purpose was the phone was emergency services, if there should be an accident or anything should occur. The secondary was for communication, such as parents, you know, the manager or pool employees having to call the business office or any other area for something of a concern. Or if parents were calling to tell their child that something was coming up and change a schedule. Or if the weather was turning bad and the child was not able to get a ride, so they'd call their parent or a guardian or a friend to pick them up. I mean, yesterday, my grandkids would have to walk from the pool all the way up to Mission Lane in that rainstorm. So it wasn't a bad rainstorm, but we've had worse. So that was a very big concern to me. Can I finish? Okay.
3 minutes.
I'm almost done. So I'd like to know basically what is the plan for providing a phone for the pool, because it is a safety issue, and I'd be curious to know what the safety plan would be for the pool if an emergency does rise, because I haven't found anything. But by coming here and bringing this to your attention, I wanted you to be aware of the situation. I wanted the community to be aware of the situation, because from what I understood off of Facebook, I had 44 people indicate they had no idea there was not a phone at the pool, and they expressed their concern. So what I'd like to see is a phone, and I'd like to see how this outcome will play out, whether you will decide as such or not make a decision. And that's gonna reflect on how you address this and the outcome in later date. If something should arise, they can come back and say, hey, this was brought to your attention and nothing was done. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Next one is Ms. Arsenio Pacheco.
Hello again. I just wanted to ask what the issue is, or if there was a plan of action for the water situation in Sun Valley, and why is it continuously brown and dirty? Because personally, I wouldn't want to give my dog or wash my clothes in brown water. And the water line map that I received from the county or from the city is, I don't know what year that's from. I don't know if there's been test samples done from the water in Sun Valley, or what that issue, what the base issue is. Then up on Encanto, I had a friend inform me that her bathtub had been backed up and it was sewage water, brown sewage water in her bathtub. And it's had sewage backing up into her property, and it had run down the alley. And this is the second time since June 18th. I don't know if it's an issue with like employment or why, or if there's something that can get looked into so that that situation kind of clears up, because it's obviously an issue that everyone brings up, and not necessarily on Facebook. They've actually called and specifically said it. And I don't know if that ADEC map is out of date, but I don't know where the test sample sites are, because I requested that also and I didn't get that. I got the water sample results. I just wanted to know where the test sites were and where that water gets tested at. But that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Pacheco. Okay. Moving on to call to the public for items on the agenda. I have not been given any. Item 7, new business, discussion and possible action. The Brownfield grant presentation, we have Dave Laney from Stantec Engineering.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you said, my name is Dave Laney. I work for Stantec. We're a consultant to Coalition of Communities in Navajo and Apache County who are in the process of developing and implementing what's called the Northeast Arizona Property and Business Revitalization Program. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. First, I'll tell you what the program is, what kinds of properties are eligible to get funding and technical assistance with the program, give you a couple of examples of how this kind of funding has been used elsewhere, and also what kinds of activities are covered with the funding. And then I'll stop and take questions. So this is an effort by communities in Navajo and Apache County to identify, plan for, and provide technical assistance and funding to property owners who want to reuse, redevelop, and in some cases expand their property or their business. The emphasis is on vacant, underutilized, blighted, and in some cases contaminated property. But the goal is to improve economic development through enhancement of these properties. And you know, this program provides, as I said, technical funding and or technical assistance and funding for the property owners who want to do this kind of work with their properties. It's paid for with EPA community-wide assessment grant of $600,000. This was awarded in May of last year. The money didn't become available until October, but the grant runs, it's a 3-year grant, runs until September 30th of 2024. And the communities that have access to this include Holbrook, Pine Top Lakeside, Eager, Springerville, and St. John's. The nice thing about this grant is that it's 100% grant funded. None of the cities had to put up any of their own money or do any sort of matching in order to get this money. And both publicly and privately owned property can use this grant. So anything that's owned by cities, county, nonprofit, as well as any privately owned property. And the nice thing about this is, even though it is an EPA program and the money comes from EPA, it's one of the few EPA programs that I know of that does not have any enforcement whatsoever attached to it. So if you are a property owner, you use some money to get an assessment of your property or your building through this program, you don't get a letter in the mail, you don't get a knock on the door, you don't get a phone call saying, okay, now you need to do something else. The idea is we're trying to give the property owner information about the condition of their property so that if they wanted to do something more, they'd know what the next step might be. You know, some of this stuff is going to be required if you, some of these assessments, if you go to a bank and try to get a loan. Some of it helps if a developer is interested in your property or if you want to sell your property. And so it really is valuable information that you have to pay for yourself, but it's no cost to the property owners if they use this program. This is just a list of the folks that are in the coalition. You can see Ted has been participating, but also a lot of the city managers from the different cities that I mentioned. Also the Community Development Director for Apache County. So I mentioned eligible properties. This is a brownfield assessment grant, and some people hear that word and kind of run the other way because to them that means every property is contaminated. That in fact is not the case. A brownfield is property where the reuse, redevelopment, or expansion is complicated either due to the presence of contamination or just the perception of contamination. So, you know, a lot of the properties in this program, probably 70% from what EPA tells me, don't have any contamination or it's very low concentrations, but they have an unknown or uncertain history about them. So, you know, it's property that's been used before, but nobody knows, other than what's there today, what used to be there. So 20, 30, 50 years ago, there might have been something there that's gonna cause you a problem if you buy it today, but you really don't know. And that's what scares developers and investors a lot of times is they look at an old property, they kind of like the way it looks, but they have no documentation on it. This is what people think of with brownfields, you know, old gas stations, old dry cleaners, old manufacturing facilities, auto repair facilities, that kind of thing. But we've actually used this grant for a lot of cities in northern Arizona for things like old schools, churches, hospitals and health clinics, strip malls sometimes, or stores that are in shopping centers. Underutilized parking lots, old railroad, abandoned railroad yards, things like that. One of the questions that sometimes comes up is, okay, so we might have brownfields in our community, how did they get here? Who's responsible? Well, I can tell you that along Route 66 in northern Arizona, the federal government, when they put in Interstate 40, created hundreds of brownfields. Because when Route 66 and its influence on all the cities went away, then you know people weren't driving through downtown anymore. They could bypass a lot of cities, and so motels, hotels, restaurants, gas stations, all of which did great business when Route 66 was active. And that was the only road in town. You know, they suffered and a lot of them went out of business and they're still suffering today. So that's the story about brownfields in this area. There are other things that create brownfields. Natural disasters a lot of times will create a brownfield because a building gets damaged, the business moves out and just leaves it behind. Sometimes if businesses downsize, like the auto industry, you know, they don't support a lot of the dealerships out of Detroit that aren't doing enough business, and so they just abandon them. They don't ship them cars anymore, and so they go out of business. That's a brownfield. So there's a variety of different reasons why we have these properties, but what they all have in common is that they have potential to be something else and something better than what they are, and to help the economy if somebody buys them or redevelops them. As you might imagine, these properties do not generate tax revenue. They don't generate jobs or create jobs, and they tend to have a negative impact on property values, not only the property itself, the brownfield, but for the surrounding neighborhood. And they also tend to drive away investors and developers who are looking for something with a little more certainty than what they have with these properties. But if they are redeveloped, there's a lot of positive things that can come from that action, including not only all the things I talked about, like increased property value and job creation, but also better protection of the environment, public health, and enhanced quality of life and community pride. Here's an example of a brownfield in Williams. This was a hospital that was built in the 50s. The Williams Hospital District owns it. They put a health clinic in it and ran it for many years, but there was concern that there was asbestos in the building. They did find a little bit. They decided rather than take a chance, they closed down a third of the hospital and not use it for health clinic activities, just because they didn't want to take a chance. Fortunately, there was one of these grants that served Flagstaff, Coconino County area back in 2012 to 2015. Williams Hospital District used some money to get a survey of the building and found out for sure that they did have asbestos. But then they were able to use that information recently together with a $53,000 grant from Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, which was a brownfield grant that originally came from EPA. They took all that asbestos out. They ended up taking the building down, putting up a brand new $6 million building, a new health clinic, which is even bigger than the old hospital, and is much better in that they now have adequate space for things like physical therapy. They also can provide dentistry there, which they never were able to do before because they just didn't have the space. Here's another site in Flagstaff. This was a site that was impacted by the railroad and an electric utility about 100 years ago. The utility was actually burning sawdust from some of the remaining sawmills that were there in town. They had to cure some of the lumber, some of the poles that they use to string electric lines, and also the railroad ties. So jointly, the railroad and the utility dug a hole and fill it with creosote, which was, you know, good for them. But they picked a bad spot because it's right next to the Rio de Flag, and if you know Flagstaff, that thing floods almost every year, and so there are about 1,500 properties in downtown Flagstaff that have had to buy flood insurance for 100 years or more, and well, for as long as flood insurance has been around, I guess I should say. But it was because of this creosote pit. Fortunately, with the same grant that the Williams Health Clinic used, Flagstaff spent about $150,000 money from EPA and Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, cleaned up this creosote pit, and then last year they have another grant from the same source, EPA, just like this one, that Holbrook has access to. They spent just $4,000 to confirm that there's still no contamination there. And now they qualify for $152 million from the federal government to rechannelize the Rio de Flag and eliminate the need for people buying flood insurance, 1,500 properties. And they're also taking down this old warehouse and putting up a new transit center that can house 15 buses at a time. It's also going to be a mixed use, so there'll be some businesses in there, and there'll be a little bit of residential in there as well. But you know, they wouldn't have been able to do it without just $154,000. They got $152 million from the feds. So here's another case study in Flagstaff. This is an old
Yeah.
yes, exactly, Switzer Canyon. It's the Diamond Dodge Chrysler dealership that was in Switzer Canyon. It was there for years and years, but the husband and wife who owned it, you know, Detroit stopped sending them cars. They couldn't make the mortgage on it, so the bank was going to foreclose, but they were concerned about contamination. So they went to the city, used some of this EPA brownfield grant funds, had what we call a phase 1 environmental site assessment, and then the bank used about $30,000 of its own money, in addition to the $5,000 from the city, and took out like an oil water separator. Then they ended up selling the property to Barnett Delaney for a LASIK eye center. So, you know, the city got a brand new medical facility in place of a defunct car dealership. So that was definitely a win-win. And then the last example I have here is another auto-related building in St. John's. There was the Patterson Automotive Building, which was a dealership for years and years. City of St. John's actually used EPA brownfield grant funds that came through Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to remove tanks, remove contaminated soil from those underground storage tanks, and take out petroleum contamination. And then they used city funds to actually renovate the building. But before they did that, the building that City Hall was in was totally unusable. So they had no place to go, and now they've got a nice building. And if you ever are in St. John's and you go inside this thing, they've still got a lot of the old beams that the building was originally built with, that I think came from some bridges in the area when they put up the car dealership years and years and years ago. And when they renovated the building and put in City Hall, they just decided to keep those. So what can you do with this grant? Well, the first thing that we always do is we do a brownfield inventory. And we actually completed one in May of this year. What we do is we go and we look at EPA records and we look at publicly available information that ADQ has, just to get an idea of where there are properties that maybe at one time had something that could be an environmental concern, like a gas station. But we also look at county assessor records to see which properties maybe are currently vacant, but are of a decent size and have the right zoning and the right placement on a major roadway that a business might like those. We also look to frequently at like tax delinquency records, because then we have a motivated property owner who wants to do something with their property. And here are the results of the brownfield inventory that we did for this coalition. You can see that there are a fair number, I think 74, over 5 different communities. And they do include some gas stations and some auto repair facilities, but they also include old buildings, just buildings that were built before 1980 that might have asbestos or lead-based paint or something like that. Here's what some of those brownfields that were identified by the inventory look like in Springerville. There's a tank farm in the top middle. The bottom middle is an old gas station that's right next to City Hall that's up for sale. But there are a few other things, like on the bottom right, I think that was part of an old convenience store. And upper left, I think, was just an old motel. But here's a few pictures from right here in Holbrook. Ted and I looked at some of these, and it's not too hard to see how some of these got to where they are right now. I mean, they were, again, active, thriving businesses 20, 30, 50 years ago, but a lot of these, again, suffered because of what happened with the interstate system. You can see there's 2 gas stations, 3 gas stations, a restaurant, an old motel, and a business. So, and they're right on, most of these are on Hopi Drive or Navajo Boulevard. The second thing that we do with this grant is we just have community outreach and engagement. We have some fact sheets to give to the public, one that's for property owners, one that's just for community members. We have one page that has some of those success stories on it that I mentioned, just so people have examples of what these grants can do. There's also a web page on the Apache County website that has grant information. The goal is to have something like that on every website for every community in this coalition. We don't have one up on Holbrook's website yet, but hopefully we can do that. And then there'll be some public meetings. These are pretty low-key meetings. We try to, go to the Chamber of Commerce meetings or go to, the Rotary Club or something like that and spend 10 minutes talking to people. Occasionally, there will just be a meeting about this grant, but since people don't know brownfields, people don't like EPA, people don't like the federal government, you know, it's always better to try to go where people are rather than try to attract them to something that's just focused on this. So you might hear about a few meetings here in Holbrook. We try to have maybe one a year over the 3-year grant period. The third thing that we do with this grant is to develop what's called a site nomination form so that property owners can formally enroll in the program. It's just a 2-page form. It's very simple. What's your address? What's the owner's name? What's the owner's address? What's the property currently used for, and what do you want to use it for in the future? And what's your schedule? Because sometimes, you know, the bank says you got 30 days to close escrow, and you're in a hurry. Other times, it's, you know, well, I want to do something in the next 5 years. So it's really good for us to know that. That has a bearing on how quickly we tend to move on some of this paperwork. Because right after we have the site nomination forms, we have to get EPA or ADQ approval. They just look to see, is the property eligible? And the biggest thing that, the biggest eligibility requirement is just, is the current property owner responsible for any contamination that's there? So you're not gonna see, say, the major oil companies who are owners and operators of a gas station bring that to this program and say, I wanna get a free assessment. I don't have money to pay for it, and you know, I wanna use EPA's money. They won't do that. But if somebody bought an old gas station, wanted to turn it into a coffee shop, or wanted to put in a gift shop or something like that, they absolutely will qualify for this because they weren't an owner operator of that gas station. And ADQ actually looks at the things like gas stations and sites that have petroleum on them, like old auto repair facilities. And EPA looks at buildings that would have hazardous substances like asbestos and lead-based paint. So they kind of divvy it up as far as who's responsible for stamping it approved for the assessment. And we've had very few that have not gotten through. And normally it's, okay, like in Flagstaff a few years ago, they built, they want to look for asbestos in all their fire stations. Well, that's fine, except they built half of them and they bought the other half. EPA said, well, we'll let you do an assessment with this grant for the ones you bought, but not the ones you built, because if you built it, then who's responsible for putting the asbestos there, if it's there? And it would be you, it'd be the city. So there are a few things like that, but generally speaking, most of these get approved. And then once they're approved, we actually do the assessments. There's a couple different kinds. We do a phase 1 environmental site assessment where we look at the history of the property, you know, historical photos, city directories, Sanborn fire insurance maps, which go all the way back to 1860, 1850, in some cases, not in every case. And we also interview the property owner and find out, you know, what do you know, what have you been doing with the property, and what do you know about the people that were here before you that owned it? And we document all that. It takes about a month. It costs about $3,000 to $5,000 for a phase 1. If there's a recognized environmental condition there, which means there was a release of something, we can almost immediately go to a phase 2 environmental site assessment where we go out and collect samples and we send it to a lab, and it gets tested. Those cost about $25,000 and up. So those are pretty expensive, and they take about 3 months to do. And that's something that the property owner would have to pay for. Say they wanted to sell it or they wanted to get a bank loan, they would have to pay out of their own pocket for that. But with this grant, they don't pay anything, zero. Then hazardous building material surveys, those are for asbestos and lead-based paint. And we go in, and that takes about a month to collect the samples, get it analyzed, and get a report out. So it's pretty quick. It takes EPA and ADQ about a week to 2 weeks to approve the eligibility, and then we're right into the assessment. So you can have information information on the condition of your property within 6 weeks in most cases. And then the grant will also pay if there is something on your property or in your building that we would recommend you take care of, and you don't have to. It's not an enforcement program. We can tell you what your options are, what the different approaches might be to actually taking care of it. For example, you got lead-based paint, you can encapsulate it in place. If you got asbestos, unless it's friable, you can manage it in place. Don't spend a bunch of money tearing it out. Leave it there. And maybe in some cases you'd have to put up some drywall to keep it from, I don't know, being blown on by your air conditioner and made friable. But there's a lot of very easy, very cost-effective ways that you can deal with some of this stuff without spending thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so that's what you would get with, say, a site reuse plan. And we also have some planners for commercial business owners, say they want to keep their property but they want to expand, and they are looking for some ideas on what kind of landscaping could I put in that would make my property more attractive, what kind of signage, what kind of paint, what kind of, I mean, my planning guy is very detail oriented on some of that kind of stuff, but he can give free advice to folks and write it down for them, or give them a little diagram or a drawing, like an artist rendering. Here's like 3 different ways that you could improve your property if you want to spend some money. And we give them cost estimates on what it would cost to do some of that landscaping and some of that other stuff. And then the final thing is cities that are in this coalition can get area-wide, what we call area-wide plans. And that is a plan that helps to address some issues that might cause developers to want to avoid your city. So say, but we have some cities in Arizona, like I have one of these grants down in Cochise County, and Sierra Vista, right next to the Fort Huachuca, the oldest area of town. They have a really old sewer and water in that area. So they're using this grant to do an infrastructure feasibility study. Which lines need to be replaced, how much would it cost, that kind of thing, and this grant will pay for that. The grant also is really good because you can get an area-wide plan that includes a market analysis, if you want, that says, okay, these are the kinds of businesses that your city is ideally suited to attract and retain. Here are some others that you have said you want to think about or you want to try to get interested in your city. But here's the things that you're going to have to do over the next 3 to 5 years to actually get them to come to town. You know, you need more trained workers, and they need to be trained in these 3 or 5 things. You need to look at your zoning because there's some issues there. You need to look at, you know, your tax structure for property taxes or something like that. You know, we actually have done several of these market analysis around Arizona and in the Southwest. So we have a general idea of, for certain market sectors, what they're looking for and what they say they can't live with and don't like. So we could provide some of that information in a report that says, okay, you know, this is where you're strong, this is where you're weak, this is what you want to do that you're not doing now, and what you need to do to get there. So I think that's a really good and useful tool that we've seen several cities take advantage of. The one thing this grant won't do is it won't pay for cleanup. The good news is, as you saw with the success stories, that ADQ has cleanup money from EPA, and they come in right after these assessments. They get done with this grant many times. When a city-owned property or a county-owned property or non-profit-owned property gets an assessment, and they will come in and they will pay in those circumstances for cleanup. Now, privately owned property, it's a little different situation. We do know several different sources that private property owners can use to get cleanup funding, but they're a little bit more on their own. You know, the expectation is that they go to a bank, they use their own money, they use their family's money, they cut a deal with a developer who's interested in their property, or maybe they'd sell their property. The goal is not to force anybody to sell their property. They can hang on to it for as long as they want, and they don't have to clean it up because it's not an enforcement program. So, but if they did want to clean it up, we would work with them, even if they're a private property owner, to try to get them funding and find ways that they could do that cost effectively. The main thing about this grant is that these never succeed unless everybody in a community knows about the grant and gets involved, at least to the extent that people talk about it. So we do ask that folks in the city government talk to property owners, talk to developers, talk to real estate people, or give me an opportunity to talk to them, because I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about this anywhere, anytime, anyhow. But you know, if you just have, say, community members that like this grant, or you just have lenders that like this grant, but there's nobody else in the community, like property owners hate it or are afraid of it because they don't know enough about it, which is more likely, then it's oftentimes not very successful. And Holbrook actually did have an opportunity to use a grant like this about 10 years ago. And some of the same properties that are in our inventory this time were in our inventory 10 years ago. But nobody talked to those property owners 10 years ago. And so those properties are still there, and they're in worse shape than they were back then. But I think that can be changed. Just one last thing, as far as a takeaway and some very specific concrete information. For every $1 of this grant that gets spent on a brownfield, $23 on average of private investment is spent. That's the national average. Property values increase 5 to 15% on average, and it's not just the brownfield property, but it's properties within a four block area around the brownfields that increase in property values. For every $13,000 to $17,000 worth of these grants that's spent on a brownfield, one job is created on average. And then, of course, you know, the grant helps to restore and protect the environment and public health. So that's all I have, but I'd be happy to take questions if anybody has any.
I got two for you. And
Sure.
you already answered the first one. Will this pay for the removal of underground storage tanks, or is that cleanup?
Well, that's a good question. EPA says when you have an assessment grant, we won't put in writing that you can take out an underground storage tank with that grant, but we also agree that there's no way to tell whether there was a release or whether it was leaking when that tank is in the ground. So they routinely pay for removal of underground storage tanks with this grant.
Okay.
The thing they won't do is they won't pay to dispose of it. So I took one out in Williams, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago with this grant. EPA paid to pull it out of the ground. It was a metal tank. The property owner sold it to a scrap metal dealer, got money for it. It was a win-win. I mean, they didn't cost them nothing to get it out of the ground or to dispose of it. So, yeah.
So I'm a member of the public and I'm watching online today or tomorrow or
Okay.
next week.
Yeah.
And I have one of these properties. Who do I talk to? How do I learn more, and how do I enroll aside from, where do I find that form?
The form right now is on the Apache County website under Community Development Department. Ted has hard copies, and so I would talk to Ted Soltis, or go on the Apache County website.
Dave, and we should work on getting our website up to date,
Yes.
so we'll have the same information.
Yes, absolutely.
Is it on the Stantec website?
It's not on the Stantec website, but if people want, they can email me at dave.laney Lany@stantec.com. STANTEC.com.
I had one more spring to mind. Are you doing another public meeting like with the chamber in Holbrook, or is this it for us?
I'd like to do one with the chamber here in Holbrook. I have not asked them yet, but I absolutely think that would be useful.
Ted will be able to get you in contact with Cindy.
Yeah. There is one other thing that I didn't mention because I could talk for 20 minutes about it, but we do have what's called a Brownfield Advisory Committee. And that's 1 or 2 or 3 citizens from each of the coalition communities. And they just look at the properties that are nominated and provide an opinion to the coalition. Is funding merited or is it not? Because sometimes you'll get somebody that's way out in the country, has a gas station that used to be really popular, but it's on the way to a coal-fired power plant that got shut down, or a mine or something else, and the gas station closed. And that is competing with funds, and I say competing because it's not really that serious, but they're asking for money just like the properties that may be in downtown. And so somebody has to make a decision. Are we gonna treat all the properties equally and fund them all on a first come, first served basis? And normally the answer is yes, but the Brownfield Advisory Committee is a group of citizens who helps the coalition make that decision. And the folks here that are on the committee are
Cindy DeFoy and Ivan Larson.
Oh, right, Cindy's
Yes.
on the committee.
Yep, yeah, so, yeah, the Chamber of Commerce knows about the grant, but, yeah, I just haven't asked Cindy, can I come and talk to you guys?
Thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to talk to you after the meeting.
Okay, I'd be happy to stick around. Yes, sir.
Historic buildings.
Yes.
So, if you had a historic building, you'd want to restore it to the way it was
Yes.
in the 1880s or 90s or whenever.
Yes.
And you just couldn't encase that asbestos. So does that assess those in the light of them being historic?
Well, one of the interesting things that we find with historic buildings is that before 1900, you don't have a whole lot of asbestos. It actually started being prevalent around World War I, maybe even a little earlier than that.
30s through the 50s was.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're talking about a historic building that was built in the late 1800s, we find very little, if any, asbestos in it. The only time there'd be asbestos in a building like that, most likely would be somebody tried to renovate it, brought in something that was, manufactured in the 50s or 60s,
Right.
Because that stuff had asbestos. But yes, the goal is to try to respect the historical integrity and not propose anything that's out of character with that building. We actually have, I can't even think of the name. I want to say it's architectural historian or historical architects, yes, on our staff. And their goal is, unlike a structural engineer that would say, oh, take this wall down or put this up over here, and, because I gotta have the building standing and I don't necessarily care about the historical quality of it or whether it's consistent with what was there originally. These guys, that's all they do is just look at it and say, is that consistent with the historical character and integrity of the original building? And if it's, and they will provide a written opinion about, these are the kinds of things you should do, these are the kinds of things you should stay away from, here's some recommendations on how you can address the conditions of your property without stepping over the line and making it into something that never was originally. So, yeah, we try to do that religiously on all good historical properties.
So like you had the mobile station.
Yes.
In one of your pictures,
Yes.
it's been here since the late 40s, right? And
Capital Gas.
is that what it was originally?
Yeah, I think so.
That muffler shop?
Well,
Yeah, it was Capital Gas and Muffler Shop, I think was the name of it at the time. I think they did both. I could be wrong, but.
it'd be cool if we could bring back some of the Route 66 heritage and
Absolutely.
restore things as they were.
Yeah.
Make them tourist attractions.
Right. Well, that's what's so great about a lot of the cities along Route 66 is they still have a few of those old buildings, and you know, some folks just turn them into whatever, and you know, you can't even recognize them for what they used to be. But then there are places that try to respect the original appearance of those buildings. I know Williams has been real successful in redeveloping brownfields there, but of course they were, unlike Holbrook, they were the very last city along this stretch of Route 66 that got bypassed. You know, you guys were one of the first, so they have a, you know, what, 15-year advantage on the city of Holbrook, yeah.
Kip, did you have anything?
Yeah, and you probably kind of already answered my question on the historic sites that have been recorded with the Register of Historic Sites.
Yes,
You know, because you got strict guidelines on what can and can't be done, and working with the architects.
yeah, the
stuff
historical,
like that. So the experience is there at your
Ar-
end?
architectural historians, I think, is actually the
Okay.
title now that I think about it, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and especially, you know, with this, we've got the 100-year anniversary of Route 66 coming up here in
Yes.
3 years.
Yes.
You know, and a lot of these communities along this I-40 corridor are really, and with the grant money, trying to get some of these places restored,
Yes.
because, yeah, it's gonna bring the people, you know, we just gotta build it back,
Absolutely,
you know. and
yeah.
So this grant, if people are listening, hopefully they are, especially a lot of the business owners that, will look into it, start asking questions,
Yeah.
and, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's even, I don't know if you guys have noticed on Navajo Boulevard, there's an old gas station from the 1930s. On the right-hand
Shell?
side, yeah, it's just the portico. that
No, I
comes
mean, it
out.
was a Shell station.
Oh, it might have been, I don't know what it was originally, but,
Founces owned it for a long time.
and I know it was like up for auction at one time, a few years ago, or, I don't remember when, but
The one right up by the Chinese food place?
I think so, yeah.
That was a Whiting Brothers.
Original.
Was it? Okay.
Yes.
They had a lot of them. I mean, somebody could do something with that, just, you know, put something else in there, but, you know, scrape it and paint it and make it in, you know, keep the original appearance, but obviously, you know, bring it back to life. Because you don't find those very often. I mean, not that old. And it's unfortunate that it's just sitting there, you know, rusting. But, yeah.
Okay, and I know Ted's been he's in contact with a lot of the business owners of these properties and stuff like that, so they're aware of what's going on. With the brownfield assessment, from what I understand, this actually also would help people that were searching for different types of grants and stuff, having that assessment aids in the grant process and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. We have seen, well, like with the success stories, I mean, City of Flagstaff, to get $152 million, I mean, they had old properties right in the middle of town that they couldn't do anything with because they didn't have an assessment, and, you know, to get to use $150,000 of this grant to get $152 million from other programs, because like part of that is from FEMA and part of it is from EDA or somebody like that, some other federal agency that's totally unrelated to EPA.
So it opens up all kinds of
It does.
possibilities.
It does, absolutely, yeah. And SHPO, I think, speaking of historic buildings, if you spend grant money like this, they have a grant program where they will come and make some of their money available to you as well.
So where does the name come from? Brownfield, Texas, or? I mean, that's the first thing that comes to
I drove
mind.
through there 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only,
I don't really know. I do know that the whole program started with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and they actually initiated it, EPA didn't. They called the administrator of EPA and said, our inner cities are dying. This was 25, 30 years ago. Because people leave and they don't clean up the property before they go. Sometimes they don't even sell it, they just move out of town or out of state, you know? And so, the mayors were the ones that said, we need some help with some of these old properties that nobody's taking care of. And I know Winslow I've worked in Winslow for a number of years, and the city manager over there, who's now down in Bisbee, he was asking city council at one time, give me $200,000 a year to tear down buildings along Route 66, because we have so many property owners that are not keeping things up to code, they're not maintaining their buildings, and things are catching on fire. We got graffiti, we got kids, you know, that are breaking windows and things like that. And that's one of the things that I didn't mention, but when you got brownfields, you do have more crime, and you do have graffiti, and you do sometimes have gangs, depending on where you are. You know, so that's definitely not something you want to have to do.
Brownfield, Texas wasn't my thought. I thought a brownfield into a nice looking building.
Well, there's also green fields, which is a property that's on the outskirts of town that's never been developed before. It looks nice and beautiful, but it's got no infrastructure a lot of times, you know. So the developers have kind of a love-hate relationship with these properties. They don't know what's there, they don't know if it's contaminated, or if there's something there that's gonna cost them a lot of money. But they do love the fact that a lot of them are in downtown or have been developed before, and so they probably have water, they probably have sewer, they probably have electric. Yeah.
Good. I talked to Ted quite a bit about this, and he's kinda excited about it, you know, and I hope we can pick it up and move. You know, it kinda saddens me, as you mentioned, I didn't know that this was offered 10 years ago and it wasn't taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think,
I wish it'd been nice if it was taken advantage of 10 years ago, we'd have been way ahead.
Well, you know, it does sometimes require you to spend a little bit of political capital and go out on a limb with property owners that you know and just say, hey, you may not like the federal government, you may not like using other people's money, but developers sure do. And so here's something that you might wanna take advantage of, and I've seen more times than not when folks in city government don't mind talking about this grant, that it takes off and goes somewhere. And if they don't, it generally dies, it withers on the vine.
Yeah, like I said, Ted and I talk about it quite a bit, so. All right, any other questions from this one? None? Thank you, appreciate you showing up, explaining what's going on.
Are you gonna stick around then? Sure.
Okay, moving on to, summary of current events. I don't have anything at this time. Councilman Marsh?
Yeah, I was gonna compliment the Chamber of Commerce. They slipped their new trifold. I think, I saw you have, I forgot mine, of course. They got a new trifold out, and it looks really nice. Oh, quadfold. It's got a map of Holbrook with some highlights, distances to some of our local natural places, and some history of the town. They did a really good job, and I want to compliment on them. They did a good job with that. So check it out if you can.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Wolford.
Shout out to the Kiwanis for the 4th of July celebrations. Big turnout. I enjoyed the heck out of it. So yeah, great job from that, and that's all I got.
Thank you. Councilman Mills.
The firemen, what an incredible job they did on the barbecue and the fireworks. We are so blessed to have a volunteer fire department in Holbrook that it's as involved as they are.
Councilman Kessler. Nothing? City manager.
Okay, so we ordered, as you know, we're working on our parks and project after project. As the guys get moving along, we start on the next project.
They're still working on the dugouts. Matter of fact, today they poured concrete on 2 of them, and then next week they'll pour more concrete. So getting ready for the next project, I ordered grant-funded baseball benches for Lisiski Park. The old wooden benches have exceeded their life expectancy, they'll warp and so forth. We also have ordered some gathering tables with umbrellas for the pool. Staff over there is pretty excited about that. We'll be ordering 4 new tables, they're round tables, and each table will have umbrellas on them. There's no shade over there right now. We are researching replacing we talked about this when we went through the budget process. We're researching replacing pool tiles and cracked concrete decking. We're aiming to have this done before next pool season. This project is also grant funded. I wrote a grant for barrel-filled lighting, but judging from the success or failure, if you will, from other communities, it's a long process. That grant's been applied for a few times, but I'm hopeful. Wrote the grant, we'll see how that works out. 2 of the vehicles we ordered, a pickup and a dump truck, were canceled. We ordered them and they just canceled our vehicles. Apparently there's a supply and demand issue, they just simply canceled them. Hopefully the remaining dump truck, which we have prioritized for the cemetery, will not be canceled. As you know, we ordered a smaller truck for the cemetery along with an excavator. Hopefully those 2 orders will still stand. I wanted to let you know it's once again profitable to recycle cardboard. When I first got here, we couldn't even locate anyone to take the cardboard. Then we were able to sell a load at basically break even, and this time around we made a nice profit. So cardboard prices are back up there. We're excited about that. And we're working on new staff over at the transfer site's doing a great job, and as he said, he wants to provide one-stop drop-off. Right now we've got cardboard in one location, other products in another location, and so he's working diligently on getting that site cleaned up so that we can move cardboard to one location, so you can dump your cardboard off, your metal and your trash and so forth, all in one location. So we're excited about that project. Meetings are taking place to discuss safety improvements for the railroad crossing on Navajo. Mayor and I participated in a conference meeting. The idea is, the big concern is, what's traffic reroute gonna be? We're looking at, they wanna close the interchange off for at least 48 hours, and we're letting them know what our concerns are. Obviously, our concerns are fire safety, police safety, and so we're working on making sure that we have some sort of emergency access still in place. The other alternative is to simply have people drive out to Winslow and back again, and I think, as the mayor discussed, as the former fire chief, that we really need to be looking at some sort of emergency access there. This Friday, the State Transportation Board will be holding a meeting here. The meeting will be from 9 to 12, so the public is encouraged to come. Of course, any of you are encouraged to show up for the State Transportation Board meeting. Mayor and I will be participating in that meeting. APS is having an elected and community leaders meeting on Monday, August 22nd from 9 a.m. to 12:30 in Flagstaff. If you're interested, let me know and we can RSVP. Okay. Mayor Young and I will also be participating in that. It's a great meeting. It's very informative. I've been to a number of them in the past, and it's enjoyable to learn what's going on as far as APS is concerned. And finally, I'll be attending an out-of-state Brownfields conference. This is really exciting. It's a 4-day event with many topics and agencies represented. With all the brownfield sites in our community, I believe I'll be able to glean some valuable information and bring it back to our community and how we could help folks in our community. Good news is the conference is 100% grant funded at no cost to the city. So I'm really excited about this. You heard our presenter, Dave, did a fantastic job. It's really a good program, and I believe by going to this conference, I'll learn more. Various agencies will be there. I'll find out about other grant opportunities, what other communities are doing, get some good ideas for a community. Mayor Young and Council, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Moving on to item 9, submissions of written petition for items not on the agenda. We have none. Item 10, adjournment. Chair will entertain a motion for
So make
adjournment.
a motion.
Motion,
Second.
a motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. Thank y'all.